That would be great. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
My name is Skylar. I am a property manager, and I wanted to say good evening to you all. Thank you for being here, and happy Juneteenth. You're gathered in a great room of a house of a general that fought in the Civil War. His name was Greeley Curtis. Behind you is the salvage staircase of John Hancock. And for nearly 20 years, I've been running up and down those stairs, getting this house ready for guests after guests in this 10-bedroom summer home. I've thought a lot about the people that walked them before me and what they wanted for the world around them. I've thought about the differences between the people that walked this staircase and the back staircase. Even though slavery had ended before this house was built, the effects of that cruelty linger. We've come so far, yet we're still linked to our past. So the work of Hancock and Curtis and all the bull-headed men and women that pushed for a better world continues. I invite you to walk upstairs to see all the work we've done to the second floor over the winter. Wonder and ponder with me for a moment. What does it take to build something like this house? All of the details and the time and the attention required. Every stone that was sourced from Rockport, transported here, placed, holding us together over 150 years later. All of the woodwork, from tree to workshop, and shaped, and again placed. The paintings that hang after leaving the hands of someone that spends years observing the beauty of our world and translating it, capturing it, and adding windows of moments to homes and spaces. Even the plumbing that snakes through the house, the water that washes our day away, and all the hours of effort in whatever field we're in. As you go up, notice each baluster as it twists. Instead of spiraling out of control, I have hope that we're spiraling upwards, noticing all the things that no longer serve us, spinning our web, collecting all the things that make a home, a community, a community. Welcome to the stone house of Sharksmouth Estate, still owned and maintained by the family of Greeley and Henrietta Curtis, but impossible without my parents who raised me here for the past 30 years, Lauren and Marianne Coons. May us all relish in the hard work required to keep an old house together, a community safe, and people well loved. May I introduce Tom Durkin.
Thank you, Skylar, and thank you all of you for coming tonight. For our members, thank you for your support over the year, and for many of you, many years. For our guests who are not members, we look forward to you being members starting like next week. No, really, thank you for coming. We're so thrilled to be able to be back at Sharksmouth again this year. Our fellow trustee Curtis Hollingsworth and his family have welcomed us over the last several years, and it's really a pleasure. It's such a beautiful spot. It's really one of the most beautiful places you can imagine. And being able to be here and hear talk tonight on Hopkinson and his work is really going to be amazing. At the museum, there's a lot going on. And the museum is very interesting in that it's a blend of both local artists and our history in our town. And I've said a few times to people, Manchester, the history of Manchester is really a microcosm of the history of our country. It was founded not long after the Puritan days. And the exhibits that we have down at the museum, including the current one on the American Revolution and our Manchester residents who were on the seas fighting, is really interesting. So I welcome you to come down if you haven't been to the museum recently, see some of the exhibits, become a member if you're not, and even if you're not a member, just come by and take a look. We'd love to have you. Thank you for coming tonight, and I want to also give a special thanks again to our programs committee who put on some great programs this spring, and particularly Marianne Coons, who's done so much work in pulling not only tonight together, but so many of our programs together. Mary Ann and Matt Genta come up to introduce our speaker this evening. Thank you.
Hi. I just wanted to just briefly, again, thank you all for coming. And I also, tonight's is special for me because the talk that we're doing tonight is on Hopkinson. And Charlie Shurcliff would have been the one giving this talk tonight. And unfortunately, he passed in March. So that makes me very sad, but when he did pass and I knew we were going to be doing this talk, I was, right away I knew who to call, and I called Martha. Martha graciously said she would do anything for Charlie, so I thank Martha for being here for Charlie. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know, Charlie Shurcliff was Charles Hopkinson's grandson. And he was also a painter, and in some ways I feel like he almost channeled his grandfather in some of his works. And there's one, so tonight I brought that painting in the back, which is called A View from the Terrace. So later, if you can go up and see it. So Hopkinson would come home and he would do these quick sketches of trying to capture the light on the island and the scene you see out there, because his house was just down the road. And the museum a few years ago acquired a half a dozen Hopkinson paintings, and I had the pleasure to meet Charlie at that point and really find out more about his grandfather and about how he worked, and it was a real pleasure to get to know him in that way. And since he couldn't be here tonight, I'm very pleased to introduce Martha Oakes, the Henrietta Gates and Heaton Robinson Chief Curator of the Cape Ann Museum. Martha has been involved with the Cape Ann Museum for over 25 years. She served as the curator from 1981 to 1990, and again from 2007 to 2019, after which she was promoted to Chief Curator, a role in 2020 in honor of her broad range of work at the camp. As Chief Curator, Martha oversaw the museum's collections team and is responsible for the care, development, and interpretation of the museum's extensive collection. And she's organized numerous exhibitions featuring artists that lived and worked on Cape Ann, including Charles Hopkinson, which is why she so graciously agreed to come and fill in for Charlie Shurcliff. So, can we all give Martha a warm welcome?
Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here and to see so many familiar faces, and I'll try and do well by Charlie. This was a presentation that Charlie and I put together back in 2007 or 8 when the Cape Ann Museum did a large exhibit of Hopkinson's work. And Charlie very graciously opened the family archives, pulled out wonderful photographs and pamphlets and all sorts of things, as well as showed us where all the good paintings were, took me around to family members to photograph things. It really was a wonderful experience, and so I'm pleased to be able to dust the PowerPoint off and share it again with you today. And the Cape Ann Museum is very interested in Hopkinson's career. As you know, we have several paintings by him, and he's somebody who we're always interested in exploring and who visitors really love. So I'm just going to give not too long overview, pointing out some of his major pieces, and we'll start with this pair up here. But as you know, Charles Hopkinson's life spanned an amazingly long time. In 1869, the year he was born, this country was still recovering from the Civil War, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her fellow advocates for women's rights were just beginning to speak out. And then by the time Hopkinson passed away in 1962, so 93 years later, the country was entangled in conflict in Southeast Asia, and the women's movement was in full swing. Through it all, Charles Hopkinson enjoyed the privilege of living a successful and very productive life. Endowed with what was someone referred to as the proper temperament, given access to solid education, and blessed with a loving family, Hopkinson's life was, as friend and fellow artist Catherine Lane Weems once wrote, about as perfect as could be wished for an artist. And we see on the screen here a picture taken rather late in life, and also one of his watercolors done from the terrace at the Hopkinson house. Charles Hopkinson was born in Cambridge, the second of 4 children, born to John Prentice Hopkinson and Mary Hopkinson. His interest in art began by the time he was a teenager, and by the time he was a teenager, he was already experimenting with watercolors, a medium that he would experiment with throughout his long life. Hopkinson entered Harvard in 1887 and graduated in 1891. And that same summer, he studied on his family's home in Maine with the artist Frederick Cost, and then in the following fall entered the Art Students League in New York. And in this slide, we see Hopkinson about the time he was at the Art Students League. And there he studied under the American Impressionist painter John Henry Twachtman. And Twachtman had started teaching at the Art Students League in 1889 and continued there through his death in 1902. And according to one student, Twachtman urged his students to, quote, paint in new ways, to concentrate on large masses and to eliminate excess details. And later in life, Hopkinson would credit Twachtman with giving him a very solid foundation for all of his artwork. And this painting you see here was done in Gloucester. It's a very early example of Hopkinson's work, very different from even the watercolor that I started off with. And it reflects Twachtman's influences on him with his interest in changes in tonality. It looks almost like it's been over-cleaned, but that was Twachtman's way of painting, and in the beginning, Hopkinson followed him very closely. I'm sorry, this is not a very good slide, and I need to get a better picture of this painting. But in 1893, at the age of 24, Charles Hopkinson and Angelica Rathbone, a fellow student at the Art Students League, were married. The couple traveled to Paris, where they both attended the Académie Julienne. And this portrait of Angelica was done by Hopkinson at that time, and it was exhibited in 1895 in the Salon in Paris. And it's a good example of the direction his career was heading, doing very conservative, subdued palette portraits of men and women. So very characteristic of his early work. Charles and Angelica remained married for only 3 years, and by 1897, he was back in Cambridge with his parents, dedicating himself to a career as an artist. And this is one of the early examples of paintings that Charlie Shurcliff was able to scrounge up for me. This was done in around 1900, and early in his career, Hopkinson became fascinated with exploring technical approaches to painting, including study of geometric principles and various color theories, which were being batted around quite a bit in the early 1900s. And he followed this and experimented with these practices throughout his career. I think that this painting might have been done here in Manchester. And then Charles Hopkinson, in the spring of 1903, was married to Eleanor Curtis, and that's how the connection comes with this estate here. The couple had met 3 years before when Hopkinson was commissioned to do the portrait that you see here of Eleanor seated on the green couch. She was the daughter of the Civil War General Aurelia Stevenson Curtis, and her mother was Harriet Sumner Appleton Curtis, both members of prominent Boston families. And 3 years after their marriage, Eleanor's mother had what's called the Hopkinson house built, that's just down the shore from here, for her daughter and their growing family. And here's a picture of the front of this house. So we were all enjoying the view from the porch looking down. And this is what it looks like when the leaves are off of that beautiful copper beech tree out there when we look back up at the house. And then this is the front of the Hopkinson house, which many of you have probably seen, which is just a stone's throw away. again built for Charles Hopkinson and his wife Eleanor. And again, these are pictures that Charlie Shurcliff dug out of the archives. Charles Hopkinson's marriage to Eleanor Curtis, marked a turning point in his artistic career. And for the next 40 years, she would be his business partner, his chief promoter, mother of 5 daughters, and his sometimes sailing companion. The picture on the left was taken about 1900. We suspect they were courting or something. And then the picture on the right was taken a few years later that shows them with their first 2 daughters. With home life settled and Eleanor fully behind him, Hopkinson's career began to take off. Again, this is the early 1900s. He had his first public exhibit in 1904 out of a studio on Park Street in Boston. It included mostly portraits and some landscapes. And a year later, his work was included in an exhibit at the Worcester Art Museum, along with paintings by no less than Winslow Homer, John Sloan, and Mary Cassatt. So all of a sudden, he's propelled up into the major leagues. Critics praised his work, commenting that it was, quote, direct, full of life, sunshine, and air. Here we see a portrait of Margaret Curtis. So this was one of his sister-in-laws, done around 1903. In 1906, Charles Hopkinson rented studio space on the top floor of the newly constructed Fenway Studios on Ipswich Street in Boston's Back Bay. The complex consisted of 46 units that had been designed specifically for artists. So they had north light, they had lots of working space, some of them had living quarters in them, as well as studio space. Some of the artists who worked alongside Hopkinson in the building included William Paxton, Philip Hale, and Lillian Westcott Hale. And those are artists that we now associate with the Boston School of Painting. And Hopkinson remained in the Fenway Studios for the rest of his life. He must have been the longest tenant in the building. He did not live there, but he went to the studio probably daily. The Fenway Studios did not have a formal exhibit space, however, so Hopkinson and all the other artists just continued to exhibit things in Boston and here on the North Shore, wherever they could. So if there was one thing that the studios lacked, it was a formal exhibition hall. Some of you might recognize this painting. We exhibited at the KK Museum almost on a permanent basis. In 1909, this painting, entitled The Claude Lorraine Glass, was exhibited at the Walter Kimball and Company Gallery in Boston. It was done by Hopkinson here in the Curtis house and shows his sister-in-law Harriet seated outside where we just were in a wicker chair reading a book. In the glass door behind her, the artist's family and himself are reflected. And Hopkinson chose the title, The Claude Lorraine Glass, as a reference to a Claude glass, which was a small convex mirror that artists would sometimes use. They would put their backs to their subject and look in the mirror and paint from the reflection in the mirror, thinking that it helped them to reduce and simplify the colors and the shapes that they were seeing and therefore improve their paintings. Of this painting, one critic at the time commented that its daring color values, particularly the greens, were colors that, quote, few men would have had the nerve to paint. I'm not sure what that means. I guess men didn't paint greens like that. While Hopkinson's landscape paintings and paintings of his family were well received by the critics during this early period, it was his work as a professional portrait painter that gained him the most recognition during his career. Particularly his portraits of distinguished individuals, the vast majority of them being men. In 1809, he completed a portrait of Charles W. Eliot, who was his maternal uncle and also the president of Harvard. The commission led to scores of other commissions, and in time, Hopkinson would complete more than 50 portraits connected to the Harvard community, and in doing so, he gained the nickname, the court painter of Harvard. By the time he stopped taking commissions in the 1940s, he had produced more than 450 of them. Mostly men and women, again, mostly women from across the country. And amazingly, I think it was perhaps Eleanor who started the process, and then some of the daughters completed a catalog raisonné of portraits and landscape paintings by Hopkinson, and it's just amazing the breadth of people that he was commissioned to paint. This is Calvin Coolidge in the last year of his presidency in 1933, and this is part of the White House collection today. When Charles Hopkinson wasn't painting commissions for his daughters, he loved to paint self-portraits. And he had started doing that when he was at the Art Students League, and he used them to test various theories and work through challenges that he was facing in his commissions or in his other painting projects. And over time, he produced more than 70 portraits of himself, including this one, which is now part of the Smithsonian's National Portrait Gallery, also in New York. This dates to about 1910, so he was still quite a young man. And it's very fascinating to see the progression of how he depicted himself all the way through the very end of his life. In 1913, Hopkinson was invited to submit works to the International Exhibition of Modern Art in New York City. More commonly known as the Armory Show, the exhibit represented the first time that works by French modernists were shown in this country, and they were displayed alongside works by American artists who were committed to the progressive art movement. 4 works by Hopkinson were included in the Armory Show, and this is 1913, including the one that you see here, and this depicts his 3 eldest daughters. And critics were enamored with this painting, and loaded the praise onto Hopkinson, and which gave quite a boost to his career. And I think this still remains in the family, although I'm not sure. And then 2 years later, in 1915, Hopkinson began what is probably his best-known painting, The 3 Dancing Girls. This is one that we have at the Cape Ann Museum, and it's always on display. It really is one of those paintings that you find visitors standing, mulling over for the longest time. Infused with light and motion, 3 Dancing Girls captures 3 of the artist's daughters dancing on the lawn outside the Hopkinson house. And as we know, there's a study for it here. And I suppose if it took him 5 years to complete the painting, he had a lot of time to do studies. 8 years to finish it. And although the finished painting conveys a sense of spontaneity, it was as carefully composed as any of the artist's work. In the inset, if you can see it, Hopkinson is holding up the painting while it's in progress. I suspect he's outside here on the terrace. And if you look carefully, you can see the geometric pattern that he's drawn on the canvas. And he did this quite frequently. And he laid that out to guide his composition, leaving nothing to chance. So although the painting does appear very carefree and spontaneous, it was all very, very carefully composed. And this is the painting that fellow artist John Singer Sargent saw while it was in progress. And Sargent suggested to Hopkinson that he add a 4th figure, and of course Hopkinson could have because he had 5 daughters at that point, and that Hopkinson make the girl on the right in the finished painting be curtsying rather than standing upright, which Hopkinson originally had her, and she's sort of curtsying in this one. And Hopkinson listened to his friend, and he took Sargent's advice on the curtsy, but he declined to add the 4th figure. Charlie once showed me another study where you could see the shadow of a 4th figure on the right-hand side. So Hopkinson tried, but he painted it over. You like it with 3? This is another painting that Hopkinson did of his daughter, Mary. And this work dates to about 1918. And we also see a family photo with the artist and Mary taken inside the Hopkinson house. And I often hear the docents at the Cape Ann Museum repeating this story, so it's something that resonates with them. But it's often recounted that Hopkinson painted his daughters so often that they grew up assuming that all children spent a similar amount of time posing for their fathers. And of course we know that's not true, but he must have had them posing all the time. And as far as we know, he rarely sold these family portraits, that they stayed in the family. this time we see Harriet Hopkinson in the foreground, and behind her, her younger sister, Mary. So this painting is entitled H.H. for Harriet Hopkinson and her sister. This painting was shown in the Boston Art Club in 1915, in 1916 at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and in 1950s at the Century Association exhibit in New York City. So he held on to these paintings again and showed them repeatedly, and I guess they were evergreen because they were accepted into these exhibitions, not thought of as out of date or anything. And again, this painting stayed in the Hopkinson family and was just recently bequeathed to us, so we're very pleased to have this one also. Very reminiscent of Sargent. We have visitors who frequently want to tell me it must be by Sargent. It's by Hopkinson. During the summer of 1916, Hopkinson was invited to display works in the inaugural exhibit at the newly constructed gallery on the Moors in East Gloucester. The gallery was the earliest public art gallery on Cape Ann, and that first year Hopkinson's paintings, a family portrait of course, and a marine landscape were featured prominently in the show, displayed alongside the work of Frank Juvenek, who was a very well-known American artist by that time and considered the dean of American painters. And it's hard to see in this photo, but underneath the left-hand wreath, the little girl in the white dress, that's the Hopkinson painting. So it was given a place of prominence in the exhibition. Hopkinson was friends with the Atwoods, who established the gallery on the Moors and ran it, and he was exhibited there numerous times during the 5 years that the gallery was in existence, and then was asked to serve on their jury to select who else would be represented in the shows of the gallery. And along with him on the jury were such well-known painters as Jane Peterson and Paul Fournier, and the sculptors Anna Hyatt Huntington and Charles Grafley. So he had risen right up the ranks to be alongside some of the most esteemed American artists of the time. Another high point in Hopkinson's career came during the summer of 1919 when he was asked to serve on an 8-member team of American artists sent to Paris to paint the portraits of the delegates to the Versailles Peace Treaty that was convened at the end of World War I. This would have been quite an honor for him. Other people in the artist group who went included Cecilia Beau from Eastern Point, Edmund Tarbell, and Joseph DeCamp from Boston. Hopkinson was asked to create 3 portraits, and you see them here. On the left is the Premier of Romania, Serbia, in the middle is the Premier of Romania, and then on the right-hand side is the delegate from Japan. And when these portraits were completed, these 3 and then the ones by the rest of the artists, they were gathered together and traveled across the country here in America, stopping at several venues. And I'm not sure where they all are now, but I'm sure they're all in museum holdings. While few will argue that Charles Hopkinson is best remembered for his work as a portraitist, watercolor was a medium that he experimented with and enjoyed throughout his life. And like the paintings he did of his family, his watercolors were labors of love, and he rarely sold them. Many of them, like the ones you see here, show the view from either this house or from the Hopkinson house. The works are direct and spontaneous and filled with light and color. The ocean is always there, and the rocky shoreline, and frequently a windswept tree or a windswept shrubbery. And while all of his portraits were done in the studio, his watercolors were done outside. And while his portraits are very subdued and dark, all of his watercolors are very bright and animated, sometimes verging on abstraction. The difference between his portraits and his watercolors was not lost on the critics. And some of them loved the disparity, and some of them just were confused by it. But just think about the painting of Coolidge compared to these watercolors. They're totally different artists. In 1920, Hopkinson began exhibiting his watercolors with a group of other Boston artists, Marion Monks Chase, Carl Gordon Cutler, Charles Hovey Pepper, and Harley Perkins. And the group came to be known as the Boston Five. All of the artists, including Hopkinson, had solid reputations by that time, and so the critics really had to take note and pay attention, even though watercolor wasn't necessarily something that they were particularly interested in. And you can see that in, they exhibited widely, including at the Fogg Art Museum, as you can see from this exhibit brochure. And then the group of them, the Boston Five, went on to help establish the Boston Museum of Modern Art, which evolved into the Institute of Contemporary Art. So Hopkinson was right there advocating for progressive movement in the world of art. And this, again, is another light-filled view done from the Hopkinson house. And this is a lovely one looking down over the rocks with the children in the I tossed this picture in. I'd hoped that Steve Rosenthal would have been here tonight, but in 2009, Charlie and I worked with Steve to take photographs around the Sharksmouth here, including the views out from the Hopkinson house. And so this is from Hopkinson's living room, looking out over the water. And every time I visit it, it's always a gorgeous day. It looks just like that. As I wrap stuff up, I'd like to share this 1920 oil on canvas with you. It was done by Charles Hopkinson of Catherine Ward Lane, better known to us today as Catherine Lane Weems, or Kay Weems. Weems, as you all know, was a well-known sculptor and a close neighbor and friend of the Hopkinson family here in Manchester. She was just 21 years old when Hopkinson did this portrait, and she was just embarking on her career as a sculptor, which was not an easy thing for a young woman in the early 20th century. But he portrays her here as a confident young woman, and she must have been, because she did quite well. In 1962, when Charles Hopkinson passed away at the age of 93, Catherine Lane Weems wrote a very touching letter to his daughters, part of which I'd like to share with you. Seen as a whole, your father led a life which was probably about as perfect as could be wished for an artist, or anyone for that matter. It was in a setting of great natural beauty, surrounded by an enchanting family, loved, understood, and admired. He could give free rein to the development of his art. His talent, which was outstanding, was appreciated and rewarded during his life. Honors were heaped upon him, and he bore them lightly. His personal charm and delight, sense of humor, endeared him to all of us. In fact, he was a man to be envied. I just thought that was a lovely summary of his life. In sort of a little postscript, I'd like to share with you that in 2024, the Cape Ann Museum was fortunate to be able to acquire the 3 dancing girls. It had been on loan to us for 30 years. And we're happy to report that the painting is now with the conservatory. It was not easy to find someone who would take on a painting that's, I'm not even sure how big it is. It must be 4 by 5 feet or 4 by 6 feet. We're happy to report that he's making good progress, and that when our current renovations are done, this will be back on the wall where visitors can appreciate it. So we're hoping to send a group of people up to the Conservation Lab to see this work in process. Quite an amazing feat. And then I end, because I'd be remiss not to call out Charlie Shurcliff, who, as Mary Ann said, just passed away recently, and who should have been standing here tonight rather than me. But Charlie was a professional artist himself for many, many years, and he was greatly influenced by his grandfather. And here you see 2 examples of Charlie's work done in the early 1990s, and now part of the Cape Ann Museum's collection. They were done in Ipswich, where he lived, one showing the marsh that he loved behind his house, and then one showing down by Crane's Beach. And we're very pleased to have them. And for those of you who knew Charlie, I'm sure you'll agree that he was a thoughtful and generous man who liked nothing more than to share Sharksmouth and the Hopkinson house with visitors. And on the lower left here, you see Charlie in the purple fleece with the cap on, showing a group of Cape Ann Museum docents around the Hopkinson house on a beautiful afternoon. And we found he was at his best when he was sharing it with us. So it's nice to remember him. So thank you.